The year is 1519 in the heart of Florence, Italy. A baby girl is born. Immediately after her birth, she is stripped away from her parents and given to the nuns, never to see them again. Not because her parents didn't love her or want her, but rather because they couldn't afford to raise another mouth to feed. You see, the girl's father, Alessandro de' Medici, was a soldier and con man who barely had enough money to keep himself fed, let alone an entire family. As for her mother, she was a former servant who was only allowed to marry Alessandro under the condition that any children born from the union would be immediately put up for adoption. So it wasn't exactly under the best circumstances that this little girl was born. And even worse, the Medici family were already well known for their ruthless nature. Alessandro had risen to prominence by conspiring with rival families to betray and kill Lorenzo de' Medici, a man who had helped take down Alessandro's father. Now Alessandro himself was next in line for elimination. In order to protect his daughter from those looking to get revenge, he placed her in the care of the nuns and then disappeared, abandoning her and leaving her with nothing but a few coins, and a ring bearing the family crest, hoping these items would be enough to find her a good home. For some time, the little girl lived out her days at the convent, and all seemed to be going well. That was until one day the nun in charge of her decided she wanted her room for herself and moved the little girl to a small, dark attic. There she spent her days alone, forced to entertain herself and fend for herself. Now, despite her difficult upbringing, the little girl was extremely intelligent. She educated herself by reading whatever books she could find in the convent, studying hard and absorbing every piece of knowledge like a sponge. By the time she was 14 years old, she was fluent in Latin, Greek, philosophy, and theology. She also had a sharp mind for business and was particularly interested in astrology, alchemy, and medicine, subjects considered taboo at the time, but which would later make her infamous. Sadly, though, her life of learning was cut short when she caught the eye of a powerful man named Lorenzo de' Medici, Duke of Florence. Impressed by her intelligence and seeing an opportunity to expand his influence, he offered to take her in and raise her as his own. The girl, whose real name was Catherine, accepted the offer and quickly became indispensable to the Duke. She lived with him in his palace, where she was given access to the finest tutors and enjoyed a lavish lifestyle. As she grew older, she continued to develop her interests in the occult and medical sciences, eventually becoming quite skilled in the field. But it was something else she was even better at, getting men to do her bidding. Like her uncle before her, Catherine had a silver tongue and knew how to charm anyone into doing what she wanted. And so as she entered adulthood, Catherine started searching for her next mark. Her eyes soon fell on Henry, the second son of King Francis, the first of France. At the time, there was talk of an upcoming arranged marriage between Henry and Catherine de' Medici, the daughter of the King of Florence. But shortly after the deal was made, Catherine de' Medici got cold feet and refused to send her daughter to France. This left Henry without a bride, which was a problem for King Francis I, who wanted his son to marry someone of royal blood to strengthen ties between the two countries. He desperately needed a new candidate, and that's when he set his sights on Catherine. Seeing an opportunity to advance herself and escape her uncle's suffocating grasp, Catherine agreed to marry Henry and boarded a ship for France. But once there, things didn't go according to plan. See, since her childhood, Catherine had struggled with a serious speech impediment, which made her seem unrefined and out of place at the French court. She was also heavily criticized for her strange, outlandish clothes that reflected her Italian origins. Worst of all, however, was her inability to produce an heir. For 3 years, she went without a single pregnancy, leading everyone to believe she might be infertile. Catherine, desperate to prove herself, turned to her greatest strengths, her intellect and silver tongue. She showered Henry with affection and gifts, and as time passed, they fell deeply in love, cementing their bond. Finally, after 10 long years of marriage, she gave birth to her first child. Over the next 23 years, Catherine would have 6 more children, 5 of whom would survive to adulthood. But despite the fact that she had finally given Henry what he wanted, his attention was still stolen by another woman, Diane de Poitiers. Diane was the mistress of King Henry II, the king's oldest son, and Catherine hated her for it. While she did try to hide her feelings from her husband, she couldn't help but show contempt for Diane, who was much younger and more attractive than her. This led Henry to banish Catherine from court, forbidding her from attending important events and leaving her in charge of provincial affairs. For her part, Diane took full advantage of Henry's devotion, acting as his chief advisor and having Catherine publicly humiliated at every turn. It was a difficult period for Catherine, but she endured it patiently, knowing her time would come. Sadly, though, that time arrived sooner than expected. In 1559, Henry II was killed in a jousting match against his son, Henry, Duke of Orleans, who accidentally ran him through with his lance. Suddenly, Catherine's son was king, and she was the most powerful woman in France. No longer having to answer to Diane or anyone else, she wasted no time establishing herself in her new position. First, she set about taking revenge on Diane by stripping her of her wealth and sending her away from court. Then she turned her attention to the people of France. In terms of governing, she was intelligent and fair, appointing capable advisors and focusing on improving the lives of her people. She lowered taxes, provided aid to the poor, and worked tirelessly to make France a better place. These actions won her the adoration of the people. Unfortunately, though, Catherine had taken power at a turbulent time in French history. France was torn between two religions, Catholicism and Protestantism. Each side wanted complete control, and Catherine found herself constantly having to appease them both. On one side was the Guise family, staunch Catholics who believed Protestants should have no place in French society. They pressured Catherine to persecute the Huguenots, as the Protestants were called, and strip them of their land. On the other side were the Protestants themselves, who demanded equal rights and freedoms for all. They begged Catherine to end the persecution of their people and allow them to worship as they pleased. Torn between the two factions, Catherine tried to remain neutral, but it wasn't easy. Just a year after Henry II's death, the city of Vassy was attacked by Catholic forces, sparking the French Wars of Religion. For the next decade, France was embroiled in conflict, with hundreds of thousands of lives lost on both sides. To make matters worse, Catherine's eldest son, King Charles IX, had developed severe epilepsy, which left him incapacitated and unable to rule. Catherine did her best to hide her son's condition from the public, but it soon became obvious that Charles wasn't well. With the king incapacitated, France had no leader, and the wars continued unabated. With no hope for peace, Catherine turned to her greatest strength to solve her problems: subterfuge. She used her powers of persuasion to forge alliances with Protestant leaders and secretly funded rebel groups within France. At the same time, she maintained a facade of neutrality, pretending to support both sides of the conflict equally. This balancing act paid off in 1562 when she brokered the first treaty between Catholics and Protestants in the city of Château. Catholics agreed to end the persecution of Protestants, but in exchange, the Huguenots had to swear loyalty to the king. Catherine hoped the agreement would bring lasting peace, but it only lasted a few months. The fighting soon resumed and continued for several more years, resulting in one of the bloodiest periods in French history. On August 24, 1572, during a celebration in Paris, tensions boiled over and the city erupted in violence. Catholic mobs attacked Huguenot homes, killing men, women, and children. The massacre would go down in history as the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. While historians debate Catherine's role in the violence, one thing is clear: she could have stopped it but didn't. Instead, she watched as thousands of innocent people were slaughtered, smiling to herself all the while. In the years that followed, the fighting only intensified, eventually spilling over into neighboring countries. France became a battleground for European powers, all vying for a piece of the action. Seeing the damage being done to her beloved France, Catherine finally decided enough was enough. She negotiated a peace treaty between Catholics and Protestants, granting Huguenots the right to practice their religion freely. But as the fighting subsided, so did Catherine's power. See, throughout her reign, Catherine had been forced to share power with the nobility, who resented her growing influence. As France slid into chaos, they grew tired of her meddling and forced her to relinquish control. As Catherine's star began to fade, her health suffered. She became increasingly reclusive, spending most of her time in bed and eating nothing but bread and soup. Eventually, her body grew weak and frail, and she was confined to her chambers. On June 9, 1589, at the age of 70, Catherine de' Medici died. She left behind a legacy of political intrigue, religious strife, and assassination, which would shape France for generations to come. Today, Catherine de' Medici's story is remembered in books and films, and her image adorns everything from posters to t-shirts. Some people celebrate her as a brilliant strategist and ruthless leader. Others see her as a cunning manipulator and cold-hearted killer. But no matter how you feel about her, there is no denying that Catherine de' Medici was one of the most influential women of her time, and her story was one worth remembering.